Chile here with Sirius Talis Moon. This is Mars, our moon day. Moon is 25 degrees Capricorn, applying to conjoin Pluto, and is ruling at 22 degrees Jupiter, that's squaring 22 degrees Chiron. Mars is exalted in Capricorn, and Saturn is 25 degrees Pisces. The Sun ingressed to Capricorn, and Ascendant is close to Deneb Algedy, so that would be a great time to call on the energy of Deneb Algedy. Um, and I'd like to use, perhaps not now, but, well, I'm going to keep and call on the energies of Deneb Algedy. A couple of things I want to talk about. The first is actually to do with decision making and how treating the people that are of 12th house, which is disabled, mental and physical health related issues. So it can be disability. It can also have to do with crime, because this would also be jails. It's also to do with the bedrooms, dream state, and so on. But when we embark on the age of colonialism, which is Neptune in Aries, colonialism is not happening without global enterprise and speculative economy. One thing that came to mind, in fact, two things. I was looking at a place I go to quite often, and it's the values of Ikea company. And apparently, they have a company that protects their rights and vision. That's a non-for-profit, and is located in Liechtenstein, which is one of the capitals of money laundering. And they come from a small village in Sweden, that's Småland, and that village was of a rocky land, very, very much Aries type of scenery. Everybody left the place because the conditions were too harsh, and they decided to make sure that everybody is able to afford furniture for a home. Now, it's very interesting because with the situation of the real estate now, usually I buy there like salmon and stuff. That even that I know is problematic with the fishing industry, but not from here, from outside. Um, I talk about the real estate market and we smell fire. Usually they burn the buildings in the evening, um, but that's actually an issue. And I talk about the connection to ritual abuse. One of the scandals that they had to do with child labor. They had a tree log company that they disowned, um, and another one was a child labor. And by the way, the problems of the children was that they would get respiratory issues because of the wool that was used in the carpets. And I'm like, that's not just a children's problem. That's they were tackling child labor with Save the Children, but that was not just a children problem. It was one of the scandals that they were enmeshed with. And the reason they got into that scandal was because of the difficulty to do visitation on site of, okay, and here is an actually challenging things, because when we talk about Saturn ingressing, I talked about Schindler, and Saturn ingressing into the world decan of Aries, we talk about global companies. I have Black Moon Lilith there, and I talk about sexual sovereignty, and I have the ruler Mars in the 22nd degree of Scorpio in the ninth house. So we talk about sexual sovereignty as an opportunity and a challenge when we talk about intelligences, global intelligences, and military alliances. Okay, that ties in direct. This is why I was able to identify this as a solid value that is non-negotiable and can bring assassination if it's not kept. Now, um, when we talk about a global business, actually visiting the site, on the one hand, allocating distribution, particularly when we talk about affordable pricing. So the IKEA business model is going to be very relevant for the Saturn Neptune in Aries because it's a limitation on entrepreneurship that has to do with affordability of the final product, whether it's a weapon industry, okay, where inclusivity or the ability to defend oneself. Think about United States and the Second Amendment and people talking about the guns, but it doesn't help when people have guns and the government has, I'm talking about the Constitution right now, it doesn't help that the people have guns and the government has laser. So the limit, where do we place the limitations on entrepreneurship that are going to yield growth? And this is where having, let's say, a factory in Bolivia or a factory in India or a factory is both inclusive in terms of the economy because it allows for a franchise that can have closer to equal equity or equal equity with the cooperative business, and that can actually facilitate in diminishing gaps. Yes, not when that franchise is an illegal woodlog, but those are issues that many global companies are going to have to address. How do we mix in the local market with global franchise? For example, for me, the fact that I'm able to order frankincense and myrrh from a tree that was not cut from an indigenous business, women-led business of a tribe in, I think it was Kenya, and then test the healing effect of the unharmed tree, the tree that was not harmed on purpose to heal, and what would that do to heal mother and father wounds, namely the things we use for frankincense and myrrh, which is both for the oral health, okay, curation of cavities, deep expression wounds, ancestral wounds, the skin, um, motherland, fatherland, and so on and so forth. Um, and that requires a shipping company and and a strong local business. Now, what happens when we don't have visitation on site? So let's say I would have a company that sells, I don't know, products as curios. Um, from these well-sourced places, I would not be able to physically visit each and every business to make sure it's not, taken by a couple of, I don't know, ritual satanic group or ritual abuse group that forces the women to make an appearance of and traffics the women with me knowing nothing about what's going on and using that as supply for my products under the guise of sustainable sourcing unbeknownst to me. And so these problems are definitely the Neptune Aries problems because Neptune is far away places. It's also liquidity and it's also global franchise. Um, Aries favors entrepreneurship and speculative business because without speculative investment, we don't have new businesses. Everybody knows that the problem of learning all the things, being a good apprentice, but not managing to find the right job because one doesn't have experience. And this is where the solution of value-based company actually resolves and allows for inclusivity. Um, and this is where the second problem comes to mind, which is closer to my field of expertise because my Mars is on the 22, on the kill and be killed. And this is where the first invasions to United States, what we now know as the native land of middle America, which is basically United States. We have South America, and the middle part is United States, and the northern part would be Canada and Alaska. And Middle America, but also in the north and probably the southern parts, upon invasion, and that was basically a colony of the British Empire to begin with. And let's say the person sitting in Britain or the person sitting as the head of the colonies would get information that their people came to the land wondering how do they get mingled with the land. And some tribes perhaps gave them an Indian gift, or they thought something was a gift and then it was taken away. Okay. And some people cannibalized on them. Now, it's not being aware that just going to these new lands, the people of the land died by the masses just because of the foreign bacterias and ailments that they did not have solution for, albeit growing all the natural crops that are superfoods. So it's not impossible that some of the people came by with, and by the way, the head of the foundation wouldn't always know about it. So some of the people came back with active viruses to spread, and some of the people were simply sick, bringing ailments that weren't there before. Unusual bacteria, but then to think about it, how come the superfoods didn't negate those bacteria? What happened? Okay, the meeting of different bacteria can definitely get people sick, but death? What were these people care? Because when we think about, I saved an amaranth from being harvested by the people that want to tend to the land of of the building, and that thing there is superfood. That thing there beats cancer. Why wasn't it beating? Okay, why wasn't it beating the ailments that came from the colonizer is a question. But then, long story short, from the point of view of the global company, there are people getting cannibalized. It may be what would you send your people to negotiate and build business, They get cannibalized. Okay, I just want. What would be your decision making regarding? Now, these are a pack of people that didn't have housing in the motherland. That's why they agreed to venture on this journey. They weren't a pack of rich folks. Yes, it cost a lot of money to get there, but the people that went that would risk, the sailing the ocean that the Titanic drowned in, and I think even the Queen Elizabeth was not the size of the Titanic. Okay? That was quite risky. And then the people get cannibal get cannibalized. Um, this is how orders like kill all of them, have nothing left there, and take over the resources and the land come to life. Neptune in Aries. Now we say, but they came to develop a colony. They didn't know what's in there. What's in there? New land. They could meet bears. They could meet aliens. They could. They didn't. That was like outer space to Britain. Kinda like Mars. Now, how do I know about the cannibalized things? By indigenous people, by people that are First Nations and are sick of hearing themselves as victims all the time. By the way, it is those First Nations and things, um, the lady from Oregon, permaculture, that talks about First Nations. I don't remember which First Nation giving up a 30 million deal with ICE. And that's their land because they would be marketed that is their bringing back the land. So those types of lines of communication, um, and by the way, I was prompted to look at that, and here is my second topic. And that is Sedna. I actually um, ordered my first Sedna related, and the business actually donated to women that escape violence. Now, I'm the first I'm the first to raise awareness to the problems with the so-called shelter solutions. But that business is actually in Estonia. And another thing that came from Estonia through Greenpeace, and I know Greenpeace is not really, but they did deliver news that are valuable, and this is that Standard Oil used an oil drilling method in Estonia in particular, and now they want to use the same method in the Dead Sea that was extremely polluting. The missing thing, and only now I connected to Sedna, because the missing thing was that the investments in oil are by child and human trafficking money laundered. Now, here's the fascinating about, by the way, the name of the business is Anetteprs, Annette PRS, illustrations by Annette Pierso. Okay, and she has a business with Estonia. They have a factory in China for the um, uh, altar statues. Very, very affordable prices. Okay, it's a print of the original art, and that maintains. I love the idea of that being a print because that maintains the artist to own the original and allows her to. And the price was extremely affordable. She does an extra. She does the extra mile to make sure she covers the shipping and taxes in the price. However, maybe not the shipping, maybe a small thing. However, it's almost nearly impossible to ensure that, particularly with something that's coming from China. Um, so there's a lot of logistics going into that. And right now, Estonia really needs, because they wouldn't. The Sedna story is the girl that was trafficked because she didn't find a suitor, and those are the people that are trafficked basically to be traded and having that money laundered as investments in oil. The drilling method was very not ecosystemic. That's associated particularly with Standard Oil of Rockefeller that Annika Lucas was also trafficked by. Um, and Annika Lucas is, she was born in 1963. I know you don't ask a woman to her age, but in that case it matters because we're in 2025 and that has not changed one bit. And we have the drilling methods that was used in Estonia being used in the Dead Sea, which is affecting Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Syria, and the neighboring countries, most of which cultures are originally not really attuned to women's rights, including Israeli culture, unfortunately. Okay, and um, and basically the women that escape violence there um, need these shelterings to escape human trafficking. Now, I don't know if those women are trafficked in the shelters or not. Um, I do know that this artist is from Estonia, and her business is almost exclusively around celebrating the women goddesses that wouldn't go with Standard Oil. But it's before Standard Oil, and I talked about Yugoslavia when I was in Ikea. Um, so before Standard Oil, um, there were we couldn't have extortion calls in those regions, which is Eastern Europe, without the child trafficking, and the people that escape the child trafficking get programmed to be supposedly sex workers, and as basically traffic is the continuation of trafficking. I know that there are some people that later would have the choice on how much they take from clients, and that's a very intricate way out of trafficking. Okay, so I don't want to disown that Um, and it can also have to do with lesbian women that didn't find a suitor. Now, and that can be both because of sexual orientation, and I know that LGBTQ is also part of ritual abuse, and can be coping mechanism, but also if there is no men that honors erotic and non-erotic needs, one cannot know if they're lesbian or not, or gay or not, as a man. And because also men were trafficked there, and they were dressed as women, and sometimes they had genitalia mutilation related with that, and that money would later be laundered in oil. The oil company would serve as a decentralizing force to the monarchy regime. I remember that was like that during the Tsar days in Russia. Okay, and would work through a lot of charity, but that would be on the account of those trafficked children and women, and that created malnutrition through food companies that don't really provide nourishing, nourishing soil, treating the weeds, treating the superfoods as weeds, um, which induces cancer, by the way, and induces susceptibility to the immune system, even to gluten. Okay, it doesn't mean that a person that is gluten sensitive can now go to a land if they find land with nourished soil and immediately eat all the crops there, even if they're wheat. But you know what? It doesn't mean that either. Okay, it's like we really don't know because we don't have access to such soils because of the dark occult practice to deprive people. And this is why I see this business in Estonia that's really celebrating the female goddesses from the Nordic mythology, to the Celtic, to the even Semitic Lilith. And so, very, very, I'm going to open the page for the business. So, this is Hecate, a lot of Western esoterics know. And this is her website. She ships internationally. Prices, okay, relatively affordable. Okay, 49 euros for the American client, I think, is still affordable. Um, for the Israel, it would be three times the price, but then Israel is a strong economy. For example, I would still be able to order that by even if I'm supported by welfare in Israel, which is notable. And a lot of people think, oh, welfare in Israel is the Rothschild. No, it's our harvested life energy that caused us disability, the working sector that is not inclusive and takes away the housing rights and working rights from people. And that is basically our welfare that we're supposed to consider as charity and go through humiliation rituals to get welfare. Okay, which would mean that our testimony would be less, will be discredited because of the rituals that we went through to basically be acknowledged, to get basically our own wealth and well-being that we still fight for, even if we're supported by welfare, because we said no to human trafficking enabling economy. Okay, and most of the people would be terrified to make the moves I made back when I was in my 20s. that I still deal with to this day with Leumi Bank and Credit Card Company that had a Swiss bank account but sent people after me and my family for 2 decades because I did not comply with saying to people, yeah, I set your monthly return as 400 shekels as the small lines where their expenses would be 4, 5, 6,000, and the next in subprime before they lowered the interest, before, right, just 2, 3 years before the subprime crisis, plus black market level of interest. When I myself refused to hold a multi card because I didn't see why people need an external credit card, but I agreed to be in an incoming call center and see what are the needs of the client and what is it that I don't see about credit that people like to use. For me, it was a job because I couldn't find a job. I couldn't stand on my feet. I couldn't be a waitress. I tried to work for Yediot Aharonot before they got rich with oil and gas. Um, and then there was actually a guy that was bullying there that I was afraid of. And it was very funny because they had Yediot and they had Mariv. And we were at the call center. We were telling people, yeah, it's 3 months for free. Later you can go to the to the other company. And literally we were instructed to say that. And I was like, what is this thing? How is how is the news profitable with that type of stuff? But the reason I left there, and it seems strange to me, particularly I come from people that come. My mother is an author, so I was like, "What? This is a very. I'm getting paid. What's the business model?" But the reason I left because there was somebody really creepy at work that I was afraid of, and I just left. And then the only place I could work with would be a credit card company. I wasn't accepted to Visa Call, and because they had all these psychometric exams, and then the lady from Manpower had an interview with me. I had to sell her glasses. I had to sell her the frame of the glasses. Apparently, I was good at that, and she brought me to Leomi card. And funnily enough, when it wasn't a test, then I was performing beyond well in the equations part that I was not usually well performing. In fact, I was one of the best performing in all of their testing centers, and that was the call center was supposed to be incoming calls, because and then they turn it to outgoing calls, but they had an option there because of past stupidity that I helped remediate, and they, on the basis of that, without consulting me, hired new people and kept the multi that was supposed to be closing alive without consulting me. I made that screen, it's called a screenplay for sales conversations for outgoing calls, and I took my frustration by actually coming up with what solves problems for people, and I made it as a service, and let people know that their card will be turning to the multi-card where they can change their monthly returns, which is why I didn't agree to recreate that thing. And they hired people, two sets of people, not consulting me, paying them a lot of money, with my okay with my with the opportunity that basically I helped facilitating, but they were salespeople, and they would agree to tell people, I'm setting your monthly return to 400 shekels, where I clearly saw the limitation of the opportunity and how that could be remediating to past fault of the vision of a company that says Lumi Card Smarter. We were supposed to be smarter for the client fiscally, and that obviously wasn't the case. 2, 3 years before the subprime, I'm still paying the price for stepping out of that basically credit fraud that brought people that and what do we buy with our credit? Back then, people that knew about credit score would not be subjected to that type of dumpery. They would ask me about the El Al points, the flight company, okay, the aviation company points, which I learned is important for credit card companies because and that's something that I saw as valuable, and I was like, okay, so that's valuable for business people that don't yet have their own jet plane. And I was connecting with different sectors. American people were really flabbergasted by the fact that we have overdraft in Israel, which basically means a credit card of the bank or credit of the bank without a credit card. But I was, in between me and myself, jabbing the fact that they have an outer credit card that they can get in debt with, and they were interested in leverage. They were asking about the flight points because they knew how to work with credit score. The Israeli client knew nothing about credit score. In fact, the only person that taught it what was Rich BFF on YouTube quite recently. And again, I'm not following each and every. I don't agree with her with each and every advice. Okay, she did came from trading companies. Okay, um, but um, but the reason I'm saying that is that to begin with, those who wouldn't comply with credit fraud were hunted, and I had no idea because they couldn't get and keep a job. And those banking that owned in 2010, I was in economy meeting of real estate tycoons that were invested in oil as well. Okay, so we're talking about real estate partaking in oil equity tycoons. We're talking about Bell Energy, which was the Ma'ariv. I remember his face when he talked about when they found oil and how speculative it was. And there was a person who owned a couple of buildings sitting next to me, and we look at this. There was Lev Levayev and Itzhak Tshuva, and the guy from Fatal that sees hotels everywhere. Okay, he's like a Donald Trump. He would see every shoreline. He would see, oh, we should make a hotel here and a hotel there and a hotel there, like Donald Trump in Gaza. And back then, Lev Levayev was paying out debt from his pocket, which was considered a very good PR move. And I tried to negotiate that move to the common people that were blaming the real estate cartels over the banks, while the bank, which was Leumi Bank, grabbed them by, I'm sorry, the McNuggets, to set to this panel and explain themselves because they were getting bailed out by the banks that were getting bailed out by Swiss Bank. They were getting bailed out by the government, while the common people would be prescribed Vipax, become manic, and then have their testimony taken from them for whatever crime happens to them when they try to traffic them for housing and for jobs. Um, while Stanley Fisher back then, that played with the interest, said it's not. He said don't buy houses with that, but the common consumer listened to their banker, praying that they would approve a loan because they need a house, not knowing that it's not a fixed rate loan. And my high tech company boss later lived with her family and dogs at her parents' because of the subprime crisis. So now, when I take a look as an astrologer at patterns and pattern recognition, when I ordered this particular Sedna, which was, I was looking for an Inuit owned business, and then Estonia came out, which is connected to the particular drilling method that Standard Oil used in Estonia that was not ecosystemic, but it also connects to the trafficking. And this is why Estonia needed that money coming in, and now they're doing that in the Dead Sea, um, which of course affected me. Okay, so it's definitely affected by this crisis. Everybody knows by now that I have been escaping suddenly a place that I tried to rent alone to improve my relationships with my mother that needed her own apartment and space. Yesterday, the back of the camel broke because I go to Ikea a lot, but I don't buy furniture because I don't have a home to furnish with. And then um, because I live with the person that needs their own space and me need my own space, but there is a risk of being raped inside the home for people if they try to rent an apartment, even as a family. And I guess Estonia is dealing with those things. Globally, it's happening, ice. But a couple of things that I noticed. First of all, on that day, I was at IKEA. I managed exactly to get for the on time for the free coffee, so I could afford to buy a candle there. I love their candles. It has it has the smell of laundry and cypress. It's a white candle. It has the smell of laundry. Um, but that will be later used for my Sedna altar. But here is the thing: um, because I had only so much money, and even though I have food at home, I got out of the home to give space to my mom, and I was hungry. And so I usually take from the food that people leave, so I don't steal food. Um, and to tell you the truth, if I had the money to buy, there's a long line of people, and I have disability, and I don't want to flaunt my card to the people. Okay, I don't use a wheelchair and I don't need a wheelchair, but to stand in line is something that's challenging for me. So usually when I have the money, I would just like, buy where they sell the frozen salmon. If there are not too many people, then I can buy at the restaurant. But and then there was a guy seeing me there of the workers, and he said, "Oh, you can buy food there." And I was like, "No, no, no, everything is okay." And I was incredibly pissed, and that and I walked thinking, wait a fucking second. Because I said no to human trafficking, by the way, very likely associated with the drilling in Standard Oil. Because people money launder, they try to do the extortion calls to wealth consolidate on the oil and gas in the Dead Sea, and then, and minerals, of course, and then they try to traffic the people and take over the real estate by ritual abuse and dark occult and all that dumb fuckery. Um, So, um, mm, 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 mm. So what basically happened is that I have to be in the situation that I am because I said no to human trafficking, and then um, I would go to the shopping center just to stay a little bit outside the house. There was nice music there, and my mom calls. I was going to outside to give space to my mom. Um, Obviously, I was deprived of the ability to work in settings that are inclusive for me, but also I definitely also need to spend time to heal myself and the intricacies that are involved in that. And then my mom calls. It was a Saturn hour, which was surprising. The moon was in Saturn sign, and my mom calls, which is moon, and she has a first house natally. She has a first house Capricorn, and it was Saturn hour, and she told me there's an envelope for you. And at first I thought it got without the messenger, but it got with the messenger. And she asked me to if she should open that, and I said yeah. And she showed me, well, there's this a painting. Oh, it looks like a postcard. It's like, how much did that cost you? I was like, no, it's not that much. And I was like, no, but it's like a postcard. I'm like, no, 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 it's okay. What was I ordering? From freaking Estonia. And that was the Sedna. Um, so she said, oh, okay, then you can stay more. But it was getting Hanukkah and they were having a celebration with a lot of people. And I was afraid that there was going to be a bombing. So I said, I'll return home. I was the one who warned us that we're going into 922 days, which is the lethal day. And I was like, why was that arriving in Saturn hour? And as an astrologer, I think perhaps Sedna is associated with the moon and Saturn. Okay, like Algol or Beta per se is associated with um, Saturn and Jupiter, and then Algedy with Jupiter and Saturn as well. Regulus with Mars and the Sun. So again, um, probably there are astrologers that looked into the Sedna asteroid further from the astrology point of view, but this was my first attempt as an astrologer to do Sedna veneration by buying something that's related to Sedna. And and on the way back on the bus, there was the security lady, and there was this um, religious. He was they were both BIPOC, and he was saying that she is, I'm sorry, um, 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 a slut for uh, Arabic men. So in the beginning, it began by, "Hey, people, don't show her your card for a check because she checks the cards." And then he said, "Oh, because she's a slut for Arabic men." And then he was attacking her personally. At first, I thought he was having it was not going against her, but he was having like a revolution regarding the card tickets, which was another way of Sedna veneration because I addressed the transportation and the fact that people need to pay for card and transportation in times where there is war and they need to escape human trafficking. And then he called her someone who was prostitute for particularly for Arabic men, and she had weapons. She kicked him the fuck out. I had to go down that station, so I go to the grocery store and ask for a guy to call the police, and I understand that this people like this person could have been under kidnapping children for trading that could work with people that are also Arabic and also not to trade and money launder by these very oil companies, like we had with the famous case of Heimnet. that they blamed the family member, and we don't know if it's a family member or not, that invaded the child's house when the family wasn't there. Then I see that lady, because she went by the next station and she could protect herself. That was like, it was not, I was not even worried about her, but I was like, hey, please do something, because those type of people would also kidnap children. Because if he talks about Arabics or prostitution of Arabs, it means that he's human trafficking with those Arabic people that he talks about, that probably. And then he wanted to smear campaign that lady or humiliate her in public. And that was all the topics to do with combating human trafficking, which is associated with Sedna and the effect on food. So today I looked at Ikea's values and I'm like, I'm looking at Småland, which was a rocky land. I'm looking at the chart of the founder. Actually, one of the billionaires that they have released from had a Mars row with me, with Mercury on my IC, and yeah. But the owner, the guy that founded the IKEA company, had Uranus on my ascendant, which I found completely fascinating. Has Neptune Lilith conjunction in Leo, which is my sixth house, on the 22 degree. Jupiter in 18 degrees Aquarius. And the values of the company and the people of Småland, when they founded IKEA, they were exactly in my situation, where I was coming to basically eat in IKEA and spend there. Like if I need to buy salmon, I wouldn't buy in a place where it's cheaper, and usually it's not the same quality even, but I would buy in IKEA, because if I go there when I don't have food, then I go to buy food there when I do have money. They tried a lot of social engineering around, and then I did tag IKEA, and that kind of stopped. Um, but then they were trying to target me again because I was talking about clover and the fact that it beats cancer or something. Um, and because IKEA is subjected to the 2030 agenda with the irrigation issue, um, and and then I recorded the irrigation issue song. Um, and talked about the fact that the Gen Z, what if the Gen Zers targeted oil, gas, and rare earth mineral companies rather than governments that are basically occupied by people that are literally manufactured, okay, by ritual abuse, and are extortable because of the ritual abuse that they went through and had to perpetuate. So shifting the governments is just taking down the people that know too much, and some of them would agree to become a part of that in like the global organizations, or to own equity in the oil companies. They would need to comply with shit ton of ritual abuse and trafficking, and which, by the way, would make them susceptible uh, to go extinct, basically, because if you talk about the global. Um, However, if we transmute that intent to the ritual abuse from the get-go, then then that's the only way that anything can be. And here is another issue. If you think about Sedna's story, why all also the women were having issues with Sedna? Because she said no to what they didn't say no to, or to what they were afraid to say no to. But how will things ever improve? And this is how colonialism, genocide, democide, and entire population and humanity going extinct is happening. Because when those things don't change, then people don't have food. And no matter how much they pay for the food, monarchies eat in luxury restaurant. They put purslane, but they do not put enough purslane that will help them beat cancer. That perhaps is how King Charles got cancer to begin with. If he would eat the food that okay, you would never be sick to begin with. And he's the king of the biggest empire. Is if he doesn't have nourishing food, he has the best of food from all of the planets. But obviously, it didn't. It still enabled overgrowth of cancer cells. That because of the bloodletting rituals. That is because of pollution that comes from the plasma-based medications. That is because of the habits that permeate the kingdom. So I definitely saw that um, this form of Sedna veneration both exposed me to a new business and the location where they already begin to deal with what the Middle East, the Dead Sea region, basically is dealing with regarding Standard Oil. Israel, Palestine, Yugoslavia, oil, Dead Sea. So both societies that are susceptible to what? Child abuse. But then it was quite fascinating that looking at the values of IKEA, it was like, wait a second, the founders of IKEA were pretty much in my situation. And that goes to Småland in southern Sweden, which is closer to my Rahu line. And funnily enough, the company that protects their rights and concepts is a non-for-profit that sits in Liechtenstein, which money laundered to create fake teeth was the legit business. So there is a lot of there's a lot of tending to things because what I ended up buying the most, other than candle and one set that I set my talismans on in IKEA, was food. Because I couldn't have a home. And one of the things that was the core values was that everybody should be able to furnish their home in an affordable price. Because homes were not even a question. And by the way, there is a working lady that has a house, but she still has to do sex work to either pay property tax or pay rent or pay for her expenses because she's not accommodated without having to without if she doesn't comply with being raped, basically that would